is a quick look back at the Michael Avenatti saga, which seems to constantly be taking new turns. And as we like to point out here, so often it couldn't be happening to a nicer guy, right? Michael Avenatti, the famous lawyer for retired pornographer Stormy Daniels, or maybe I don't know if she actually made pornography. I never actually checked into that. Slick, do you know the answer to that when you were?
I believe she did. She has a couple videos out there, but she was mainly a stripper.
Okay, primarily a stripper, part-time pornographer. And apparently, we are to believe sometime girlfriend to Donald Trump prior to his being president. At least that was a story that was told. And, of course, Michael Avenatti is her famous attorney that came out to represent her and then became a fixture on cable news such that everywhere you looked, you saw Michael Avenatti. And he even at one time was considered a presidential candidate for 2020 of all things. And now we have to kind of chuckle at that because his world seems to be crashing down around him. Just last week, now this may sound like deja vu, but this is actually a different story, right? Just last week, he was convicted after a full criminal jury trial. This time, he was convicted of wire fraud and identity theft and taking about $300,000 in book advances from the book sales of his client, Stormy Daniels, real name Stephanie Clifford. And I know what you guys are thinking. How could Stormy Daniels have sold over $300,000 worth of books? I'm thinking the same thing. I mean, who is buying and reading Stormy Daniels? I mean, is she like an author that is really sought after? I mean, couldn't we just get the Cliff Notes version of that one? I imagine that's primarily all the detail we would need out of that book. And some would wonder, are you reading it for her literary flair? Because I'm sure she has quite the way with words.
I did read Jenna Jameson's book, her autobiography, and that was actually pretty good.
Now, did it have one of those ghost authors, like the other name on the front of the book?
I think it did.
The person who really wrote the book? Yeah, okay.
May have.
Uh-huh. That's normally how they do it, because they've got such busy and important lives otherwise. Who could take the time to stop and write a book about it? Again, just sort of write up the Cliff Notes and give it to your ghostwriter and let the magic begin. Well, the Avenatti jury just last week spent about 15 and a half hours deliberating before they returned the verdict, finding him guilty, again, of wire fraud. That carries a maximum sentence, potentially, of 20 years in prison. The aggravated identity theft charge carries a mandatory minimum of 2 years, so in theory he'll serve at least 2 years. And, of course, as you would imagine after these guilty verdicts, you have Avenatti keeping his optimism intact, stating that he is, and I'm quoting here, looking forward to a full adjudication of all the issues on appeal. And as we know here, as we've said before, when you've got a full criminal jury trial, it's awfully difficult for the appellate court to step in and overturn it unless something just clearly wrong was done in the trial. And I don't know what the issues he claims he's going to have adjudicated on appeal are, but I highly suspect that they aren't going to be as fruitful as his statement would indicate. Now, he's got to surrender today in California no later than 5 p.m., and his sentencing is scheduled for late May of this year. I got some interesting quotes from the U.S. attorney who said that Avenatti got tangled in his own web of lies, and there was a mountain of evidence against him. And he said, quote, the defendant was a lawyer who stole from his own client. She thought that he was her own advocate, but he betrayed her, and he told lies to try to cover it all up. So while he faces a maximum, as we said, of about 2 decades in prison, we don't actually think he'll probably be sentenced to quite that long, although given the fact that he was just convicted in 2020 by the same federal court for trying to shake down Nike for about $25 million in an extortion scheme, and he got 2.5 years on that one, they may view him as kind of a repeat offender, as somebody who needs a little bit stiffer sentence this time to get his conduct under control. I could see something in the range of maybe 7 to 10 years, although that sounds like a long time. But let's see what happens May 24th. Again, I'm sure there's a lot of powerful things being discussed behind the scenes in that. But, of course, Avenatti doesn't have a whole lot of leverage anymore, unlike just a few short years ago, actually just a couple of short years ago when he was the main person on cable news. And lest you have forgotten this one, we have to play this one again. We've played this a number of times on the show, and we've got to play this. If you ever watch Ana Navarro on The View, she was on The View. Now I don't know what she's doing other than just sort of, sniping at Republicans and claiming to be a Republican. I'm not sure if she has a regular gig right now, but you will see her on TV from time to time. And one reason I would never, ever listen to a thing this lady says is because of this, what she said about Michael Avenatti. Listen here. This is Ana Navarro on The View describing Michael Avenatti.
Lately, to me, you're like the Holy Spirit. You are all places at all times, right? I mean, I see you all over cable news.
I mean, listen to what this lady said when she says it. Listen to this.
Lately, to me, you're like the Holy Spirit.
He's like the Holy Spirit, right? This lady is completely off her rocker, and I wouldn't listen to a thing she says just because of that kind of a quote right there. Now, lest you think that only Ana Navarro was saying this, we could have pulled a number of different quotes from different people praising Avenatti. Had this one we wanted to play for you. This is from Brian Stelter of CNN, or at least of CNN for this moment. We'll see if he's on his way out the door as well. But listen to Brian Stelter talking about what he thinks about Avenatti for president in 2020.
Looking ahead to 2020, one reason why I'm taking you seriously as a contender is because of your presence on cable news.
These people seem to think being on cable news is all it takes to, that's all it takes to run a country, being on cable news. And of course, now he is just, as he was described on several of the main primetime news shows on mainstream media, disgraced attorney Michael Avenatti. So now, after all of that, he's just disgraced attorney Michael Avenatti. Well, speaking of CNN, we just talked about Jeff Zucker resigning. That was CNN's worldwide president, Jeff Zucker. He resigned last Wednesday. He also stepped down as chairman of Warner Media News and Sports. And another guy who, the schadenfreude here is real. You can't be upset when these things happen to these people. But he had to step down because of what was called an inappropriate relationship with CNN's chief marketing officer, which apparently was ongoing for a number of years, and interestingly enough, was revealed during the investigation into Chris Cuomo's sexual misconduct. Now, we've read that it was an open secret around the CNN newsroom, so I'm sure Chris Cuomo knew about it. So I'm sure the way that it was revealed was Chris Cuomo's lawyer said, hey, you think our guy did something bad? Look at what your president did. Your president, Jeff Zucker, that being Jeff Zucker for CNN, look at what he did, and, that was what happened. So, interestingly, Zucker steps down. I'm sure that this is to try to prevent something more from coming out. And, of course, we've heard that Jeff Zucker was pretty closely, directly involved with all of the shaping of the messaging for Governor Andrew Cuomo. And, of course, that's what Chris Cuomo was part of what he was forced out based on was not only his sexual misconduct, but the unethical journalism that he committed when he basically was shaping the messaging for his brother, having him on his show, putting the messaging out there, all without ever revealing the fact that he was directly involved, essentially acting as public relations for the governor of New York while also pretending to be an independent journalist on CNN. So that was some more of the detail that was supposedly going to come out. Now, there may even be more than that, because I think these stories are like chaff that they're throwing up, hoping to catch the missiles and stop them maybe from getting to the real truth. Lord only knows what the real truth is. Megyn Kelly says there are definitely more shoes to drop there at CNN, and she would know, having been a former insider. But it sounds like all kinds of dirty things were going on at CNN. And, of course, we've shared with you all the problems they've had with their producers recently getting wrapped up in child sex scandals. So, the most trusted name in news right there for you folks. And don't look behind the curtain. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.